Journalists all over the world have today been celebrating the right to practice the media profession in an atmosphere free of harassment and any form of attack. This year's theme, Keeping Power in Check, Media, Practice and the Rule of Law, calls for an enabling legal environment for press freedom. This is why United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, in his address, called on governments to strengthen press freedom and protect the rights of journalists. This is said, as he said, a free press must be able to stand up for the truth. While many agree on the need for a universal free press, others argue that many journalists have in their quest for freedom lost sight of the ethics of the noble profession. How free is the press in Nigeria? While the media assumes the role of watchdog, that is keeping power in check, who keeps the media in check? What role should the national interest play in press freedom? We shall be looking at these issues and more tonight on Nigeria Today. I am Segun Ojelade. I'm being joined in the studio to discuss issues relating to press freedom by our regular in-house newspaper reviewer on our breakfast show, Good Morning Nigeria. I'm talking of Mr. Bayo Atoyebi. I welcome you to the program.
Thank you and good evening.
He was the secretary of the Nigeria Press Council. I say thank you for coming on the program. Yeah, with him on the program is another veteran journalist, Ben Shemang. Ben Shemang is Deputy Director of News with the Voice of Nigeria. Welcome, Ben, to the program.
Thank you, Segun.
Now, I think I'll start with you, Mr. Bayo Atoyebi. Why must the press be free? Why do we need a free press?
Well, free press or press freedom has its roots in two key human rights principles: the right, freedom of expression, and also the right to information. So citizens have a right to information, and unless there is access to information, unfettered access to information, people will not be able to have the full benefit of this. And secondly, in a democracy where the rule and the will of the majority is supposed to prevail, a cardinal principle of that democracy is freedom of expression, which people must, particularly the rule, must be free to express their wishes and their opinions about society, about their day-to-day living to the rule. So that is the cardinal of it. So the journalist or the press only becomes an instrument of carrying out to this cardinal human right principle, that of freedom of expression and the right to information.
Okay, based on some of the things that Mr. Atoyebi has mentioned, is the Nigerian press free?
Absolutely free. In fact, free to a fault. To the extent that they take on people who ordinarily one will not touch in society. So the Nigerian media is so vibrant, very, very vibrant, and I said to a fault to the extent that we begin to pass the limit and again bring in some what I call some hate speeches here and there. But in terms of freedom, you want to have access to information, you always get, because the law is there. Look at the entire chapter of chapter 4 of the Nigerian Constitution. It devotes itself to fundamental human rights, including the freedom to have information, access this information, ask for, and to also put support to that. You have the Freedom of the Information Act, where indeed the Nigerian journalists and even the entire citizenry could again look at how they could access information and make it better. So the Nigerian journalist, because of that freedom of the press, is able to hold government to account for its actions or inactions.
Okay, I think I will allow you to say one or two things about it. Do you agree with him that the Nigerian press is truly free?
Freedom is never given. Freedom is taken. And what I mean by that is simple. If you go into historical context, the Nigerian press had been at the forefront of even fighting to redeem this nation from colonialism. And if you come to the interregnum we had with the military into governance, again the Nigerian press were at the forefront of championing the move to get the soldiers to get back to barracks. So the Nigerian press, in spite of some of the challenges they have faced, have always been taking their freedom to the peak of securing the society and giving the society itself the will to take full advantage of freedom of expression.
Ben mentioned the issue of the FOI, Freedom of Information Act, and then we cannot remember what it took us to get the bill passed. Everybody was clamoring for it, shouting here and there, even blackmailing the National Assembly, government, but since the bill was passed into law, there hasn't been any landmarks, no serious investigative journalism. We have not heard of people asking for information and getting real information.
Well, you see, the Freedom of Information law is to guarantee the right and access to information for every individual. And particularly the law in Nigeria as it is not exclusive for the journalist. It's for every individual. Okay. However, because the job of the journalist is to seek information for the members of the public to express that they are right to know, that is why it had appeared to everybody that, yes, the journalist stand to gain very much more in the course of his duty if the Freedom of Information law came into being. However, in spite of the fact that the law has been in existence and you observe that it's not been utilized, a law becomes a paper tiger unless and until people use that law for the purpose for which that law was enacted. The law has been enacted, so it behoves on journalists to use that law and get to the root of it. In fact, of recent, some civil society organizations have been using the right of information, the freedom of access to information, the Freedom of Information law effectively, and they are getting response. For instance, there is a civil society organization called SERAP that had gone to court and had demanded that the National Assembly should provide information about its earnings, its salaries, and the court had granted that. Okay. So it depends upon you and I, the journalists, and also the citizen, as far as the freedom of information is concerned, for you to use the law to get the information that you require, because it is meant to enhance transparency in governance.
Okay, we've all agreed that the Nigerian press is free, but have we been, journalists now, have we been judicious in the use of this freedom? Again, have we been careful enough? Because if you listen to some commentaries, if you read some headlines, like I read today, somebody said with the ways you get some news items twisted or manipulated, it's like the Nigerian press is on the way to perdition or destruction. Do you believe that we've been being careful and we have used this freedom well enough?
Honestly, many, let me put it this way, many have not been that careful, but again, very many are careful. In other words, maybe 50-50. Why do I say that? In terms of not being very, very careful, there are times we toy so much with what I call national interest, national security. Now, look at the appointment of, say, the DG of NIA, the way it was so carried in the press, and of course, people didn't know when they overstepped their bounds, and you began to make the security network architecture kind of to look very porous, a kind of for the international community to begin to have some doubt as to the capability of some agencies. And now, if for example, the president says, look, some of these crises we are seeing in Nigeria, these are people, some infiltrations from leftovers of Gaddafi. It's now left for the NIA, for example, to kind of begin to set a dragnet to reach somewhere. But we come with a kind of a press that will just not accept this appointment, and we toy with the security. We're talking of Boko Haram, for example. There are instances where the press will always begin to hype Boko Haram. You glorify them at the expense of the security men and officers deployed, sleeping in trenches, and they are awake so that we can sleep very well. But we wake up and hit them with a very hot press that sometimes foreigners would wonder, are we actually loyal to this country? Okay. And in terms of being loyal, therefore, the interest of Nigeria has to come in. Okay. Corporate survival as opposed to let's scatter. The days of just publish and damn the consequences are gone forever.
Now he touched on a very controversial topic in journalism school, and that is national interest. You know, at times who defines national interest? And by the time you start talking national interest, you begin to ask, whose interest are we talking? When does national interest, when does individual interest, the interest of individuals in government, when does it conflict with national interest? You know, journalists always have that problem.
Well, national interest is very easy to define, in the sense that if there is any challenge that will affect the existence of the nation, the country, if I will use Nigeria as an example, that is national interest. The interest of the individual political elite is not national interest. National security is issues that can affect the life and the well-being of Nigerians. Now, like the example he gave, of recent there's been in the public domain initiatives to acquire aircraft to empower our armed forces. It's already in the public domain. We are lucky that we are not surrounded by neighbors that are very aggressive. No nation goes to the public medium to discuss its armament strength, and therefore, whatever the case is, there must be a certain level of decorum. But again, there is a vacuum between those elites in the executive and the legislature in the way they relate with the press. There are instances you can call the press and brief them in confidence and say, this is what is happening in the national interest and in the security interest, and you tell them it's off record. That will help them as journalists in protecting that national interest and also the national security. But what happens most of the time is that there's a tendency to adopt what is called adversarial journalism. Okay. Naturally oppose whatever government comes. Invariably, journalism or the press tend to adopt a position of being an opposition to whichever government is in power. It's not right. Okay. Yes, adversarial journalism worked during the colonial era. We now have democracy. If we don't nurture our democracy, adversarial journalism can bring down democracy.
Okay. Now, but quickly before we go on break, you said there are some, and we all agree, that we still have some bad eggs in the profession and people that cross overboard in their reportage. Now that brings us to the question we asked earlier, that who watches over the watchdog? You know, do we have requisite laws strong enough to check some of these abuses of the media? But maybe I should pause for a while. We'll take a break and then we'll come back so that you can answer that question. The program is Nigeria Today. We're taking a look at press freedom. This is the day when journalists celebrate the freedom of the press. How free is the Nigerian press? We went outside earlier in the day to ask some Nigerians what they understand by press freedom and whether the Nigerian press is free. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.
If you talk about freedom of the press, you talk about the ownership of the press first. Government-owned media houses are more like the mouthpiece of the government, while those that are in the private, that are privately owned, are dictated by the political alignment affiliation of the owners. So in that instance, you will not say the press is really free.
I cannot say the press is totally free, but at least they enjoy better freedom compared with military era.
It's not free. It's not. It's not, because we do it based on, whose interest we're trying to serve at a given time.
It is written, we have press freedom, but in practice, there's no absolute press freedom.
The Nigerian Television Authority News 24 channel, your dependable all-round news station, offering you world-class news programs, documentaries, spotlights, promos, and information highlights. Take advantage of our network reach and advertise your interest, clues, and services with us. NTA News 24, first among equals with digital broadcasting. You can reach us on channels 21 terrestrial TV and channel 101 on the StarTimes platform. Join us today.
Welcome back. Let me quickly add that this program is up for sponsorship. Do contact us. Now, you've had some comments of our viewers there. We will come back to it, but let's Ben answer the question I asked before we went on that break. Who is watching over the watchdog in Nigeria today?
Very many people. Number one, the laws are there. For example, you have for the broadcasting industry, you have the Nigerian Broadcasting Commission. It is there to take care of excesses of the broadcasting industry. And when it comes to the newspapers, of course, Mr. Bayo Atoyebi was the executive
secretary of Nigerian
Press Council, and he's able. I mean, that council is able to monitor the excesses of newspapers. Again, we have the Nigerian Constitution itself. There are some limitations. Yes, you are given freedom, but that freedom could be snatched if indeed you overstep your boundaries. Outside that, you also have the Freedom of Information Act, where indeed you lie, the law is there to take care of you. Again, your conscience, there are times you have to use what you call self-censorship.
Yes.
I do remember that there were cases of some clashes in Dogona Hawa, Ratsad and Zot in Plateau.
Okay.
I was there. Yes, I could see number of corpses, and what I counted was different from what community was giving me. And again, at that point, if you know you write a story and it will inflame, put the place on fire. Of course, there is what we call self-censorship. You begin to do. It happens in Kuru Karama, again in Plateau, very close to Haipang. You could see that there were clashes. What you saw there, it's not always that you begin to give vivid and gory account of things that will traumatize society and innocent people in society.
That's another serious journalism points there. Okay, but let's move on. You heard what some Nigerians say. It's like some of them are quite apt. That journalism is the issue of a sense. I mean, ownership is key in the performance of the media. I could hear somebody say, "Okay, who pays the piper dictates the tune." How bad is that in Nigerian press today?
Well, it is very pervading and it is worrying in the sense that the tendency is that those that are owned by government tend to operate as if they want to be his master's voice, while those of the owner tend to pander towards the interest of the owner.
What is bad in that?
What is bad in that? A medium is supposed to serve public interest, irrespective of who the owner is. Let's use the example of a government medium. A government medium needs a medium that has integrity to be able to talk about his programs. If you undermine that integrity, the tendency is that you lose the audience, they won't listen, and that your medium will have no credibility. If you go to the private media, it's the same thing. You are a private individual, you set up a medium. The moment that medium begins to function and attain credibility, it adopts a life of its own. it goes beyond you. You don't have control over it any longer. It's the professionals there who should take editorial judgment. The moment you cross that line, you undermine the integrity of that media. And that is what the views that people were expressing there. But be that as it may, Nigerian media is of varying dimensions. What is harming it is the era we are getting into now, when we are warming up for general elections. You see political infiltrations. And most often than not, professionals tend to forget the code of ethics. They tend to pander towards political interest. Sometimes private owners will employ journalists and say, look here we are not doing journalism, we are doing politics. And most often than not, such media don't last. Several of them have come and they have died.
You know, I remember that great American media owner, Rupert Murdoch. Somebody once told me that you can never find, he has a conglomerate of newspapers across the world. And somebody once told me that you can never find any of his newspapers that will go against the interests of the party the man belongs. You know, and I ask, even in Nigeria, somebody has said that, okay, this media owner, have you ever seen his television station criticizing? You understand? It's a serious problem in journalism the world over. But like you said, we're going into an election period where tempers are likely to be. How can the journalists survive? Serve the public while not losing the sight of where the owner leans?
Look at elementary journalism. In your university, you're told to write your stories taking care of 5 W's and 1 H. Have they met that test? That test of who is saying what? Where is he saying it? When? Why and how? If you can satisfy all these 5 elements, your story could be credible and it could be fair, therefore, that you begin to balance your stories. Here you are, 2 parties, 3 parties, they have an issue. You just go get one side of the story and fire on. No right of response for the other party to respond. Therefore, media houses, the journalists will have to give equal footing, equal grounds for the media, whoever is at stake, or whatever issue is at stake and who is involved. Therefore, the journalists will just have to be fair, be credible, so that they are believable. If you are not just believable, no one believes in you, you have credibility question. And when you're talking about government media houses are just simply working for government. And I want to tell you that whoever is in government, government media houses is like a pot. You use that same pot for a bar. You use that same pot for rice. You use that same. It hardly could change. But that does not mean that it must not hold government to account. You have to be vibrant too, so that you don't lose audience and viewership.
Because of our time on the program, you know, we have a whole lot of issues on this, on this issue of press freedom and performance. Now, I know there are journalists out there. They've been listening to the 2 of you, especially his last comment, and they will tell you it's not that easy. When you talk balance, when you talk fairness, when the politicians come and they say, this is how I want it done, this is how I want it done, don't touch this, touch that, or the owner of the medium, you know, how can journalists, your final word, marry these 2 interests, which are very critical? Otherwise, they get fired now.
You see, every profession has its code of ethics. Journalism has its own. If somebody who is a professional makes an editorial judgment and the owner or the proprietor questions it, and he insists that that is what professionally he will want to do, if he's removed from that position and you bring another one and he says that, oh, what my colleague did is right, I cannot do anything contrary because it's against our profession. Most often than not, it is we, the journalists, that dig underfoot of our colleagues.
Well, yeah.
So that is what happened, and so invariably, it's the profession that suffers. because people want their own personal, private interest, not their profession. They are not guided by their professional principles, and not guided by the sense of camaraderie that should exist in the newsroom. But most often than not, your best guide is your code of ethics. But the challenge we have, particularly with ownership, especially in Nigeria today, with the private media, unfortunately, because of economic hardships, several journalists are owed salaries, they are not paid.
Okay.
Well, and that becomes, they are amenable to a lot of temptations. But that notwithstanding, it is criminal to do anything that is unethical.
Okay, because of our time, we will not be able to go on. We are yet to touch the issue of self-censorship, for instance, and even the implications of social media on the performance of the press. We'll have another time someday in the near future. But I must thank you, Ben, for coming on the program from our sister organization, Voice of Nigeria. We thank you for your comments on the program.
Thank you, Shegun.
Yes.
Thank you, NTA.
I don't know if I should thank Mr. Bayo Atoyebi, who is one of us, a regular reviewer on our program Good Morning Nigeria, and a brother in the house. I must also thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you for thanking me.
Yeah. This is where we call it a date on the program Nigeria Today. We shall be back tomorrow. Do join us. I am Shegun Ojelade. Bye-bye. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.